Welcome to Ask the Expert, an award-winning daily series from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments of the live feed. If you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountant and business experts are on hand 24/7. During the live session, we'll be running a poll, so please do engage with it, and I'll reveal the results at the end. If you're on TikTok, check out the Be Your Own Boss competition. Pitch a new business idea and you could win investment, mentorship, and business advice to help make it a reality. The investment pot is now up to £10,000 thanks to Go Cardless, adding more into the initial pot from the Purposeful project. So tag hashtag Be Your Own Boss to enter. So good morning, everyone. Hope you're well. It's Tuesday, still early in the week, but even though we got the news that unfortunately, lockdown is going to be delayed a little bit more, we're still positive about, as much as we can do for business until the time comes when, we're all completely free. But I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Nana Parry. I'm the founder of a company called Tectonic, and Tectonic helps businesses understand the needs of their customers. And the way that we do that is through qualitative and quantitative data capture from your potential customers or target customers, analyzing that data and recommending what you should do to improve your sales, marketing, or product strategies. And the reason I wanted to talk to you today around B2b sales and leveling up your B2b sales techniques is very much because as someone who started businesses before and started a business, I never really saw myself as a salesperson. I'm quite heavily introverted, and on that basis, I always had this idea that to be a B2B salesperson, you had to have this kind of car salesman type energy, and that was never something that I had. And then I realized, obviously, as a founder of a business, one of the most important skills that you can learn is to sell. So I started to really try and understand how I would go about doing that and creating a style that worked for me. But also, I was in a position where, some years ago, I was in an airport going to visit a friend. Was in the airport with someone waiting, and actually managed to create a transaction of around £70,000, and I had no product and no team. And that really started to make me think, okay, how was I able to do that? What things were in place? What strategies did I actually do without knowing that allowed me to convert that sale in that circumstance? So I wanted to share some of the things that I have been through, some of the things that I've learned that might help you with your own B2B sales. So the first thing that I tend to do is always try and simplify just the concept of selling, right? So by that, I mean, why do we purchase things? Why do you purchase anything? And normally it does come down to a few reasons at the core. And there are things like, it makes me feel good. It makes me look good. I trust that it will solve a problem. So generally there are a few broad things, broad buckets that the reasons why people buy, they come under. But going back to just having a think as to why would someone in a role in a company purchase something from me? Does it make them look good in front of their boss? Does it actually save them money on their budget or on their P&L? Does it actually vastly improve the likelihood of them generating revenue or selling more? Really understanding that at the base will really help when it comes to actually converting some of these sales a bit better. Secondly, there is also the idea of value levers. And what I mean by value levers is everything you sell, everything you do when you're trying to provide value to your customers is for a reason. And actually understanding that not every customer that you speak to will want to buy for the same reasons might actually help you better position the product when you are speaking to your potential customers. So with Tectonic, for example, when some customers we use come to us, or some clients come to us, it's often because they find it difficult to source the potential customers to actually understand their needs. But in some cases, that's not the problem. They've got a really wide network. So actually what they're concerned about is, how do I position the right questions? How do I ask them the right things so that I can actually get the insights that I need? And that's all in the Tectonic service, but actually the different value levels are different, and understanding that is really important. Another key thing that you could do is try and understand the needs of your customer outside the context of selling. So one thing that's really valuable is actually, so at least from my perspective, with your initial conversations, is actually not selling. The goal is, in that meeting, is not to sell. The goal is to get to the next meeting and to really understand their needs, their problems. And sometimes in terms of research, what you could do in the B2B space, if you are targeting, the head of finance, if you can find out what, if you look at the job description for a head of finance, and look at what their objectives are, or what the outcomes they need to create are, you can better position your product to align with what their outcomes are. So it's much easier in that next conversation to be able to position your product and the value that you have. Um, Another thing to talk about is remembering that you are speaking to people. Even in the B2B space, sometimes we think we're selling to a business, or we're selling to a role in that business. But actually, just like anything, we're talking to human beings. And one of the best things that I learned when I was starting out with some B2B sales was actually just trying to understand who the person was. Did they have kids? Do they have pets? What do they like to do? So by understanding that, I was better able to find ways to connect with them, so that I can not just, focus on selling, but actually building relationships with them. Because in my experience, it's always, from a B2B perspective, much easier to sell when you actually have a relationship with the individual that holds the budget, or understands the need. Another really helpful thing for me from a B2B sales perspective is understanding what I call the sales ecosystem. And in a B2B context within companies, you have the customer, obviously the person who, should be able to sign off that, I can purchase this product or service. But then you have the users, and sometimes the users aren't the customer. So if the users are not the customer, you'll need to understand how the user can get value from the product. And sometimes you might need to influence the user before actually going to the customer, depending on the product and service that you're selling. There's also the beneficiaries. So beneficiaries are people who are not the customer themselves. They don't pay for it. Not the users. They're not using it themselves, but they might benefit from the fact that this product or service is now in an ecosystem, because it actually makes their lives easier, makes their lives better, even though they're not touching the product. Then you've got influencers. So people within the company that will influence the sale, who may not actually be the customer. So they may want to push for a particular product, not because it actually benefits, they actually pay for it and it's going to benefit, their core users, but actually it might make them look good. It might actually make their lives easier. And due to their clout within the business, they might actually be influenced as well. So understanding that sales ecosystem and knowing, in that space, who is the user, who is the customer, who is the influencer, who is the beneficiary, different aspects of that ecosystem can really, again, help you go to the right person and influence the right person in terms of how you purchase, why they would purchase your product. Another thing that could be really helpful is recognizing that with B2B sales, there are a number of touch points, right? It's not always as simple as I'm a customer, I would like this. Can you buy it from me? Yes or no. So every product service, based on your own way of delivering that value and communicating, you will have an optimum number of touch points with that potential customer to increase the likelihood of them actually buying. So I have that golden number in my head. I know that for me to increase the likelihood of getting that B2B sale, I need to have a certain number of touch points. And I also know how I need to position things in to be able to increase the likelihood of them buying. So that's something that's important to know, but it's really important as well to not rush it. Number one, because due to the nature of B2B sales now, it is more competitive. There's a lot of upfront work you often have to do beforehand. And then finally, one thing I just want to say is it's not always about getting the sale today. Sometimes, obviously we all want the sale today, right? That's just part of being of trying to sell. But ultimately, you want to make sure that if today isn't right for the customer and not forcing it, maybe tomorrow, maybe 2 months, 3 months down the line, they remember that interaction. They remember how you were adding value prior to, them actually converting or becoming a part of your becoming a customer of yours, and they may come back later on. So it's really important that you don't think too much about the short term. B2B sales cycles are long, and you want, if for whatever reason they're not able to purchase, they can come back when they're ready. So these are just a few things. There's lots and lots in this space. I hope something I said was of value. But yes, we'll be moving on to some questions now. Okay, so the first question is from Izzy on Instagram. The question is, I've mainly had experience in B2C marketing, but now I'm in a role that includes B2B. What are the key similarities and differences? Anything I need to be looking for extra training on? So that's a really good question. And obviously, we've been talking a lot about B2B, but on a B2C side, there are going to be some key differences. So I mentioned earlier on about these touch points, with on a B2B sales cycle, you might start off with a digital touch point, being, a website, for example, that traffic is drawn to via some content, and it goes to the website, and then there's a little chat box that says if you want to discuss or have a chat about the service, and then it comes into the sales lead or the salesperson, and then a calendar invite is facilitated, and then a conversation is had over video or in person, more likely now over video. On the B2C side, it's very much about converting through the digital conversion route. So whereas on the B2B side, a lot of the time you will need to have a conversation with the customer to actually understand their bespoke needs. On the B2C side, it's much more transactional. You're using things like brand, trust in design, all these things, the user experience of being able to go from, prospect or someone who is interested to converting, putting that product in your basket, and then actually converting into a sale. So the key differences will be the techniques in terms of how you convert a B2B customer versus a B2C customer. The B2C is very much more about how do you get them through your funnel, through your digital funnel, to be able to convert without often the need to actually converse with the customer. Whereas on the B2B side, it is much more about getting them as far down the line as possible, but actually recognizing, due to the nature of the size of the ticket or the price, or the fact that what you're selling might not be that straightforward, you might need to have a conversation with them. So that's some of the key differences that you might need to consider. However, from a similarities point of view, it's still all about the funnel. It's still all about how do you get them through the funnel as easily as possible to the point where you know that you need to have some kind of intervention through speaking to them. So hopefully that answered your question. Thank you very much. So now on to Dev on Facebook Messenger. So a lot of our B2B marketing efforts are around relationship building and account management. So what sort of data or insight should we be capturing? And then how can we use it to make improvements? So for Dev, just around the relationship building side, you're totally right. From a B2B sales perspective, I would say that the most likely of conversion, the most likely to convert, is if you have a good relationship with the end customer. And in terms of data and insight that you'd be looking for, so one of the things that we do through customer interviews is answering the questions such as, okay, how does the customer perceive the problem that they have. And I use the word perceive very poignantly because it's sometimes you have this thing called the education gap, meaning that even though you might be sure that the customer is experiencing the problem, it's possible that they don't realize the magnitude or the benefit of having that problem solved. So it's really important to understand where that fits in the customer's mind. So getting any data or insight in terms of how they perceive the problem that they have will be really interesting to help you position the product. Also, any insight around how much they spend on particular tools and services. And these might not need to be absolutely directly linked to what you are doing, but it does help you get a bit of a picture in terms of from a budget perspective, from a value perspective. How do they actually spend, and how often do they do that? That can give you some good data as well. Another good piece of data is all around how they work with their suppliers. So again, it doesn't need to be directly linked to what you're doing, but actually understanding, so how do they make a decision on a supplier? Do they need to talk to anyone else within the business? Do they need to actually get approval from someone else to even enter into a process? Do they actually need to go through a full procurement cycle? Getting that insight, again, will better help you capture and understand how you could position your products. And then the way to make improvements is really to use the data that you collect when you're doing your B2B sell, when you're maybe doing the presentation, or you are doing some objection handling, meaning if the customer says no because of price, or the customer says no because of the value that they're getting, being able to insert the data that you have to better answer some of these objections, or just to better present and make sure that the things that you're saying to them actually resonate because you've got data from them to help. So hopefully that answers your question as well. Santino, thank you for your question on Twitter. So any tips on how to tailor and personalize messaging while keeping it on brand, but feel authentic? I worry that it gets a bit robotic or repetitive after a while. So that's a really good question. And we've probably all experienced it on LinkedIn or on Twitter or Facebook. You'll get a direct message from someone who just says, hey, I do this stuff. Do you want to buy it? And obviously, in most cases, that doesn't work. What can work in terms of tailoring your message, especially when you're speaking to people who you've never had any interaction with before, one of the ways that helps is to actually tailor the message according to what value that you can provide them outside the specific sale. So what I mean by that is, if I am trying to connect with the head of innovation at a company, I think about, okay, from an innovation perspective, what makes them look good? What are their needs? And it's really about being able to supply their end customer with advancements in technology or applications of technology in other industries that could be interesting. So what I will do is I will look at, okay, what applications, what interesting applications in blockchain, cryptocurrency, smart technology, smart cities, Internet of Things, all these different industries that I think could be of interest to them and could be valuable to them. So I may share a link, I may share a video, I may share a little bit of insight, something that shows I'm not just saying this is what I do and sounding robotic. I'm actually saying, hey, I understand who you are. I understand what you do. This might be of interest. And then you can always follow up with a conversation about, was it actually useful? I found it useful for these reasons, and try and start a conversation to try and build trust and try and build a relationship. So yeah, it is very difficult to sometimes not feel robotic, but actually it's putting in that extra work at the beginning to increase the likelihood of response to actually get them to engage with you. So hopefully that answered your question. Then we've got Bryony on Facebook Messenger. So we have 3 customer journeys based on how engaged a potential client is or isn't, and how big the business is. Is this enough? And are there other elements we should be considering? It's a really interesting question. So we talk about, we've got 3 customer journeys, just for the purposes of everyone on who might be watching. From a customer journey perspective, it's really understanding how the prospect or the lead goes through your journey to be able to convert, and potentially further than that, to actually, once they're in your ecosystem or once they're in your service or product, actually how they would transact and how they would use it. So in terms of it being enough, um, I it's difficult to say without the context of the business, but I would say that, 3 is not, it doesn't sound too low, doesn't sound too high. It does sound about right. However, what's important is what is in those customer journeys. So in those customer journeys, you will need to have an understanding of, okay, at what points could the customer leave the journey, right? So is there a point where actually, because you haven't got enough information, or because you haven't um, explained the value enough at that point in the journey, there is a risk of that customer leaving the journey, which doesn't help you. So I wouldn't say it's yes, it's enough, or no, it's not enough. But there are elements to consider, such as, at what point is the point of no return for the customer? At what point in that journey should they have totally understood the value that you're bringing? They should totally understand why this will help their lives or help solve their problem. And it's making sure that you've got the appropriate touch points in that customer journey, so that it's very, very clear to the customer why they should purchase. So hopefully that answers your question as well. Going on to Aaron on Instagram. So what sort of research could we be running with our customers in order to improve our sales techniques? So lots of different types of research, but as you mentioned, with the explicit view of improving your sales techniques. So firstly, you need to understand what is the minimum criteria that makes your customer a customer. And especially in the B2B world, for example, this could mean they have to hold this role, a specific role or equivalent. They need to hold the budget. Maybe they need to be of a specific industry. But the key thing here is to make sure that you don't have so much criteria that it makes it impossible to actually identify this customer in real life. So having a minimum criteria that makes sure it's very clear this is who the customer is, you need to have that before even considering the research. So then, now that you've got that in terms of the type of research you can do, so there are things such as, you can do surveys. The only thing with surveys is to be very, very careful, especially in the B2B space. People are very busy. If you don't have a relationship with them, it's not always easy to get them to answer the survey. And also, the questions that you ask are very, very important. It's very important to make sure that if you are going to do surveys, and actually if you're going to do customer interviews as well, it's really important that you make sure that the questions you ask are based on the past and present, not on a potential future. And by that, I mean, if you're asking questions such as, would you pay this, or would you buy this? There's actually not a lot of quality data in there. So if you are going to use techniques such as surveys, customer interviews, secondary data, you can look at secondary research as well. There could be some really interesting things in terms of deep dive reports in terms of specific industries. It's a collection of that data that could really help improve your sales techniques, because I see data as a way to arm yourself to increase the likelihood of sales. And we can't get away from the fact that there will be an element of trial and error as well. It's inevitable. You are going to have times where you're going to try something, it's not going to work, but that's also great data as well. It's also really good for you to understand that too. So I think if you collect this through customer interviews, through surveys, I'm not the biggest fan of focus groups unless you're doing brand work. When it comes to customer acquisition, you have to be a bit careful, because with focus groups, sometimes the loudest person in the room has the most opinion. So you have to be really, really good at facilitating focus groups. But those are different elements of research that you can do. But it's all about arming yourself with data to be able to increase the likelihood of positioning your product to get the sale. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Thank you. Selena on Facebook Messenger. So I once went to a marketing conference where the guy said that it's actually a good thing to keep going back to customers who have said no, because one day they may say yes. I've always worried though that eventually you just annoy them. What am I missing? Now it's a really interesting question. And I'm positioning this answer based on my experiences, not based on what 100% works for everyone. But I said right at the beginning of the talk that everyone's got their own style, and it's about how do you how are you your authentic self within your B2B sales, adding techniques, of course, but your authentic self. I don't think anything beats that, to be honest. So my view is, so when generally with selling, you're not going to convert everyone. Not everyone is going to buy from you. That's part of the game. It's okay. That's a mindset thing that really, really helped me. So personally, I will, if for any reason the sale doesn't come through, I'd say, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully we got some value out of our conversation. If I can help in the future, do let me know. I'm really, depending on the business, I'm really interested in what you do, and, just let me know if I can help. I personally, in terms of my CRM, I put them in the lost column. I lost that sale because it's really important for me to understand from a metrics point of view. But I will make a note that just says, the reason that they were unable to go ahead with the sale was for X reason. And I would actually use that as a proxy to say, okay, maybe in a couple of months, I'll follow up, not to say, hey, buy from me now, but, would you like, how are things going, basically? But that's very much my style. And I also respect that from, a small company perspective. You don't often have a strong brand, and you're actually competing with other people who have strong brands. And maybe they've got the people and the ammunition to be able to go and follow up, and do that many, many times. However, I'm of a very similar view that it's not about annoying the customer. It's about positioning your product in a way that creates value. Thank you. So hopefully that answered your question as well. Okay, so coming to the end now, and the poll results are in. And we asked you, does your business market to consumers, other businesses, or both? And 60% of you said consumers, so B2C, and 40% of you said businesses, B2B, and 0% answered both. So yeah, that's really interesting, because especially that no one said both, because you do have these businesses that are B2B2C in some ways. But I would say either, whether you are of someone, whether your company is targeting consumers or targeting businesses, I do think it's important to recognize, as one of the questions earlier was mentioned, a lot of the techniques are similar to a point. The application of those techniques are different when it's B2C versus B2B, but always come back to the principle of, why do people buy stuff? What is the underlying reason why they buy? And then understanding the value that you're providing, the problem you're solving, and getting an understanding of the different reasons why people may buy from you, and then positioning that purchase or that value depending on who the customer is on the B2B side. On the B2C side, you do a lot of that through your content, through your copy, through your design and branding as well. Okay. Thank you all for tuning in. If you want to get in contact with me, you can send me a message on LinkedIn under Nana Parry. And coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow is Aaron Patrick, an accountant and QuickBooks expert. Tune in to get advice on accounting and the latest features and tools that will make your bookkeeping easier. And don't forget the Be Your Own Boss competition on TikTok. Pitch a new business idea and you could win investment, mentorship, and business advice. The investment pot is now up to £10,000, thanks to GoCardless, adding more into the initial pot from the Purposeful project. Tag hashtag Be Your Own Boss to enter. So thank you so much for your time this morning. Hopefully you got some value out of the presentation at the beginning and the question and answer as well. Really enjoyed answering them. Lots to think about. So yeah, have a great morning and have a great day. Thank you very much.